I can't believe it. Colin and Jesse, it comes as a shock to me, but I released my top 10 college football program rankings the other night, and yes, some of you had issues with them. So I thought it to be a good time tonight for me to look at some of the most popular forms of feedback in the negative that I got and address them. Gripe number one: how could you have Michigan over Ohio State? I thought I explained it pretty well. In fact, I thought I explained the premise pretty well. So those of you who are listening now, but you didn't listen the other day, I kind of had a feeling this was coming. No matter how much I explained why someone was over someone else, I tried to get out in front of it proactively. Colin's got the video because I knew we were going to need proof. Here's what we said the other night, because this explains why someone like Michigan could be ahead of someone like Ohio State.
The disclaimer, here's what I care about. As we know, these rankings are going to be above reproach. The JP poll is spitting them out. The JP poll gets dusted off once a spring, and we're doing full program breakdowns. An announcement that I'll probably use in Twitter replies later. This is not meant to be predictive. It's not meant to forecast where you will go in the coming years. It's meant to reflect what you have been and what you are here and now. I value, when defining a program, a 3 to 4 year rolling blend of on-field results, how much have you won, talent acquisition, how good are you recruiting and portaling, how good are you developing that talent, the resource pool you have at your disposal, and overall synergy or togetherness of your program and, to a larger degree, your athletic department. That's how we define programs.
And a side note, with Academy back in the fold, let's also congratulate ourselves on Director Colin finding the prop mic, so I don't have to wear that ridiculous lav mic anymore. So that was it. That was it, basically. It's the long and short of it is, when you've been beaten by your rival on the field 3 consecutive years, I don't necessarily care that they haven't recruited on par with you, because the players they've gotten, they've developed into a team that beats you. There was not a huge gap between Ohio State and Michigan. And actually, a month ago, I had Ohio State ahead of Michigan. I told you on air, I think I'm going to flip-flop on this, because I think we really need to value the on-field piece. A lot of people said, well, they're not even going to be a top 10 team this year. Doesn't matter. It's not predictive. Somebody, in fact, many of somebody said, the only reason that they got where they got last year was because they cheated. Then feel free to investigate them, and feel free to drop the NCAA hammer on them. And when you do, I'll reassess. I've told you my stance on that. I'm not the judge and jury on this, so I'm not proactively going to get out in front of things and knock them down 5 pegs because what I think may or may have happened. And also, I don't think that is what won them a national championship last year. That's my opinion. I don't have any more proof than you do. Gripe number 2 in a long, long list was, how could you have LSU over FSU? Now, this one I think has some validity. So a lot of people took issue with me having LSU 1 spot above FSU, because I told you what I value here is the last 3 or 4 years. I want to know, what have you done on the field? How good have you acquired talent? How much synergy do you have? How good of resources do you have? And FSU fans were really quick to come back and say, we played them the last 2 years and beat them. There's your on-field. And all the other stuff, do they really have that big an edge? Well, no, I never said they had that big an edge. That's why they were 1 spot ahead of you. I'm going to tell you what the tiebreaker was, basically. You got a good point. Like, I wouldn't fight you if you put FSU above LSU just for those reasons. Because you're right, they don't have a big edge in any of these categories. I think being aligned with the SEC right now over the ACC means a little bit, but that's outside of their control. I think LSU has out-recruited them. LSU has better resources. LSU as a program at the top end has title potential, but then again, so does FSU. So again, there aren't glaring differences. There's not a glaring gap. So I don't know, the more I talk it out, the more I say, go ahead, put FSU above them. You have beaten them on the field 2 years in a row, and I know someone's going to get this to Cannell, and I know it's going to be clipped out of context anyway, so whatever. Next up, this was a gripe I did not expect, but then again, that's the best kind of gripe. How is Oklahoma not in the top 10? How is Ole Miss not in the top 10? Well, I'm not saying Oklahoma's been a bad program. Oklahoma's been a very good program. You're going to have to tell me who they go in over, though. Remember, past 3 years now, we're not predicting and we're not just judging you based on last year. There's a 6 and 7 year baked in there. Now, folks were quick to say, okay, but if you're going to judge us on a sub 500 year, Texas has one. Texas was 5 and 7. That's true. Texas was 5 and 7 3 years ago, and then they were 8 and 5, and then they were 12 and 2. And so obviously I will weight recency. Oklahoma had a double-digit win season last year as well. The difference is Texas, while Oklahoma is not recruiting at poverty levels by any stretch, they're a very good recruiting team right now. Texas's NIL component is in a different category than Oklahoma's. Specifically on the offensive side, I'm really, I don't know if curious is the word. I'm just really interested to see in the future how that plays out, because you may think NIL in totality, Oklahoma's done a much better job on the defensive side than the offensive side there. So, again, Oklahoma, if I had to go past 10, they would have been like 11 or 12. So it's not like they were a long way outside the top 10. Ole Miss, same thing. Ole Miss, you could not get much of a fight out of me if you wanted to put Ole Miss top 10. We had them 11th. I think we had Oklahoma 12, Utah 13. So anyway, Ole Miss was right there on the doorstep anyway. The thing about Ole Miss is their trajectory in many ways is the opposite of Clemson. Clemson, we had at number 10, and Clemson's been dropping, and more on them later because I think that may come to an end this year. But Clemson's been dropping. Ole Miss has been ascending. If you wanted to argue that they've recently passed Clemson, again, I had one spot between the two, so I wouldn't have really fought you that much on that. But the last gripe that I am happy to announce we got a fair amount of was, hey, you had no Big 12 teams in there. Well, that's because no Big 12 teams were among the top 10 programs in college football. I mean, that's the long and short of it. However, Utah was the closest. Utah, Jesse, we had them either 13th or 14th, I think. Really solid program. There are a lot of really solid programs out there. Kansas State's a really solid program. I love the Big 12. I am on record in the past 2 weeks as saying this is America's college football conference. So if anything, I'm looking for space in this temporary studio of ours to fly the Big 12 flag. However, I got to remove emotion here. Which Big 12 team is anywhere close to being a top 10 recruiting program, a top 20 recruiting program? Which Big 12 team is anywhere close to top 10 in things like resource or NIL and recruiting infrastructure? It's not there, guys. They're a very, very competitively balanced conference, and one of like 9 of them could win the conference this year. But we're talking about going heads up with the Georgias and Michigans, and Penn State was up there. Penn State would have been higher than any of these programs. USC would have been higher. I think. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, my point is, it's one thing to be a good, solid program. It's another thing to be top 10 in America. So that's the only one where I looked and I said, really? People are saying that? Absolutely not. You'll find no bigger fan of the Big 12 than me, though.